Does Germany have free speech? Vice President JD Vance and a recent episode of the CBS show 60 Minutes led a lot of people here in the US and the rest of the world to believe that free speech in Germany and Europe in general is under threat. But is that really the case? Let's talk about it. Hello, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio since 2016. And as we all know, the US is a country that was founded on the idea of freedom, and the right to free speech is a big part of that. That's why it was very shocking to so many Americans to hear that in European countries, that right is supposedly in decline. And that's totally understandable. But I think it's worth digging a little deeper here and getting a better understanding of what free speech actually looks like in other parts of the world. Now, I won't be able to do a full-on deep dive for every single country in Europe, but as a German, I do want to take a closer look at the situation in Germany today. And believe me, I'm excited to get back to some more lighthearted content here soon, but there were a lot of requests for a video on this topic. So let's take a look at the legal framework of free speech in Germany, the historical background, how these laws are being applied to the digital world, and how free speech in Germany compares to the US and the rest of the world. As always, timestamps are in the video description below. Now, videos like these take a lot of work. In some cases, like for these videos, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks even. And unfortunately, last week's video about the German election ended up getting demonetized by YouTube, which is why I'm very happy that this week's video is sponsored by PIA, or Private Internet Access. Not only does that allow me to invest days or even weeks in my research, but it's also beneficial for you guys because I can get you an 83% discount. PIA is a virtual private network that allows you to safeguard your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel and hide your IP address. I've been using PIA for years now, and I always turn it on whenever I'm at a coffee shop, airport, or hotel because I don't really trust those public Wi-Fi networks, but I also use it a lot when I'm at home, especially when I want to access something that's targeted towards a German audience and is therefore geo-blocked for me here in the US. That happens a lot with TV programs, for example, but it also happened during my research about the German election last month because some of the party programs weren't accessible for me here in the US for some reason. But once I turned on PIA and selected a server in Germany, I was good to go. My parents also just used PIA on their trip to South Africa recently to watch their regular German TV shows in the evening, and they said it worked perfectly. But you can also use it to get access to a bigger content library on streaming services like Netflix, Prime Video, or Disney Plus, because other countries usually have different shows and movies licensed. So while shows like Friends or The Office aren't available on Netflix here in the US, they are on Netflix UK. Just select one of the UK servers. I always choose the streaming optimized one. Refresh your page, and boom, there it is. You can choose from servers in over 90 different countries worldwide, and with my link in the description below, you'll get 4 months of PIA completely for free, and after that, it'll be 83% off, which comes out to only $2.03 a month, and you can use PIA on unlimited devices. So just click the link below or go to piavpn.com/Feli from Germany. On February 13th, the American Vice President JD Vance gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference, which, as the name suggests, takes place in Munich every year. And during that speech, he said this:
"The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America."
He then went on to talk about the Romanian election being annulled, French President Macron suggesting that the EU could potentially shut down social media platforms, Germany conducting raids on individuals for posting hateful content online, a Swedish man who was convicted for burning the Quran, and a Brit who was convicted for breaching the safe zone of an abortion clinic, before he concluded,
"In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat."
And later in the speech, he said,
"Which of course brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations.
Referring to the organizer of the conference not inviting any politicians from the far-right party AfD and the left-wing populist party BSW. I'll link a video to the full speech down below for you guys. Additionally, just 2 days after this speech, the CBS news program 60 Minutes published a piece on how German authorities have increasingly been prosecuting hate speech online. Again, I'll link the full 13-minute episode down below, but it caused major outrage, with the comment section looking like this. I think what shocked viewers the most about this episode was that they started out by showing police actually ringing at someone's door and searching their apartment, with the explanation that this person had posted a racist cartoon on the internet, which, yes, does seem very extreme. JD Vance tweeted in response to this,
"Insulting someone is not a crime, and criminalizing speech is going to put real strain on European-US relationships."
So what do free speech and hate speech laws look like in Germany? Let's take a look. In order to understand the legal conditions of free speech in Germany, I think we need to go all the way back to the year 1949, when post-World War II, the Western occupation zones officially founded a new German state called Bundesrepublik Deutschland, so Federal Republic of Germany. This new country's constitution, called the Grundgesetz, was drafted in close collaboration with the Western Allied powers, aka the UK, France, and the US. As a direct response and lesson learned from the inhumane atrocities that took place during the Nazi regime, the very first article of the Constitution states, "Die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar. Sie zu achten und zu schützen ist Verpflichtung aller staatlichen Gewalt. So, human dignity shall be inviolable. To respect and protect it shall be the duty of all state authority." And further, the German people therefore acknowledge inviolable and inalienable human rights as the basis of every community of peace and of justice in the world. The following basic rights shall bind the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary as directly applicable law. After the Nazi regime had systematically disregarded human rights and violated human dignity through genocide, aka the Holocaust, persecution, forced labor, and eugenics policies, the new German state wanted to make sure that something like that could never happen again. That's why they tried to implement guardrails that the previous constitution, the one from the Weimar Republic, was lacking, and that eventually led to Germany's first democratic republic legally being turned into a brutal dictatorship. So post-World War II, the goal was, and is to this day, to protect human rights and prevent any possible return to totalitarianism. That's also why Article 1 is protected by the Eternity Clause, meaning it cannot be abolished or changed in its meaning, and why it has no limitations and cannot be restricted, even in cases of national emergency. And as the very first part of the Constitution, it functions as a guideline for all subsequent constitutional principles and laws in Germany. Now, similar to the Bill of Rights in the US, Germany has a list of fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution in Article 1 through 19. I'll put a link to the English version of the German Constitution in the video description so you can take a look at all of these. They include rights like freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, but the article that's relevant for our topic today is Article 5, which ensures the freedom to express one's opinion, as well as freedom of press and freedom of arts. In English, the article goes as follows. Every person shall have the right to freely express and disseminate his opinions in speech, writing, and pictures, and to inform himself without hindrance from generally accessible sources. Freedom of the press and freedom of reporting by means of broadcasts and films shall be guaranteed. There shall be no censorship. These rights shall find their limits in the provision of general laws, the provisions for the protection of young persons, and in the right to personal honor. Arts and sciences, research, and teaching shall be free. The freedom of teaching shall not release any person from allegiance to the Constitution. This right is usually referred to as Meinungsfreiheit, or officially Meinungsäußerungsfreiheit, so freedom of opinion or freedom of expressing one's opinion. The term Redefreiheit, which would be the direct translation of freedom of speech, isn't really common in German, even though those two concepts are usually used more or less interchangeably in international discourse. But the German version of this right specifically focuses on the expression of opinions. And as stated in the article, the right to free expression of opinion has certain limits in Germany. Those include general laws, protection of the youth, and personal honor. The principle of personal honor derives from what's called the Allgemeines Persönlichkeitsrecht, the general personality right, and is based on Article 1 of the Constitution, which we already discussed, human dignity is inviolable, as well as Article 2, which guarantees personal freedoms to everyone, such as free development of one's personality, the right to life, and the right to physical integrity. Based on this protection of personal honor, the criminal code in Germany specifically lists Beleidigung, so insult, üble Nachrede, which translates to malicious gossip, and Verleumdung, so defamation, as criminal offenses that can each be punished with fines and, in severe cases, even imprisonment. The idea behind this is basically that one person's right to freedom of expressing their opinion, I'm just going to refer to it as freedom of expression from here on out, so that one person's right to freedom of expression ends where it violates another person's right to personal honor. Similar to how no one is entitled to physically hurt someone else, in Germany, you're not entitled to hurt them verbally either. Now, of course, figuring out the balance between these two fundamental rights, freedom of expression on the one side and personal honor on the other, can be a fine line. When it comes to insults, for example, the courts follow certain criteria to decide whether something can objectively be viewed as an insult, regardless of whether or not the person it was targeted at actually felt offended by it. What's almost always ruled as an insult are strong profanities or even gestures like showing someone the finger, but courts decide on a case-to-case basis, and it always depends on the context of the situation. Now, before anyone gets the wrong idea, it's not like people don't insult each other in Germany, and it's also not like you have to worry about straight up getting arrested if you ever do insult someone. People fight and have conflicts in Germany, just like in any other country. But because people in Germany also have these general personality rights that are enshrined in the Constitution, they are allowed to take action if those get violated by someone, for example, through insult. But in order for law enforcement to get involved, the targeted person actively needs to press charges first, which in real life is pretty rare. Even though when we look at the numbers, we can see that in 2023, a whopping 237,000 cases of insult were reported to authorities, which sounds like a lot, but when you put it in relation to the German population of 85 million people, it comes out to less than 0.3% of all Germans who pressed charges for insult that year. And I'm sure there were a lot more insults than that. Now, the law about malicious gossip is pretty similar to defamation, but in a mitigated form. It's basically when harmful rumors are being spread about a person without any proof that those are true, while full-on defamation would be when someone knowingly spreads false accusations about another person. So not only can they not prove those accusations, but they actually know that those accusations are not true. But that's pretty similar to how defamation laws work here in the US. In addition to that, the German Criminal Code grants special protection regarding malicious gossip and defamation to people who hold a political office in Germany, due to those people generally being more subject to attack. This means that there are higher penalties, but it only applies when it affects the person's public role, not their personal life. The idea behind this is to make sure that people aren't discouraged from running for political office to begin with. In 2021, this law was expanded and now also includes cases of insults against politicians, and for the first time also applies to politicians on the local level. 2 years before this change, a local politician in the state of Hesse, Walter Lübcke, was murdered in his house after he had been the target of online hate speech and death threats for 5 years over publicly defending Angela Merkel's migration policies in 2015. In 2019, a 45-year-old man involved in the neo-Nazi scene decided to bring the hate into real life. So one night, he surprised Lübcke on his own patio and shot him in the head. One of the best-known cases where a politician took action against hate speech is the case of Renate Künast from the Green Party, who ended up suing Meta over a meme with an alleged quote by her that she never actually said. This quote has been spreading around the internet for almost 10 years now, and Künast has received a lot of hate and even threats of violence over this. But the courts decided in Künast's favor and actually ordered Facebook to delete any postings of this meme. However, she also wants them to delete any similar memes in the future that might have a different design or different typos, which Meta appealed, and at this point it could take years for this case to get settled. Another case that made a lot of headlines last year was Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck, who had hired a law firm to press charges against online hate speech about him and accumulated over 700 cases in just over a year. What particularly sparked public debates was when police raided someone's home for calling Habeck a Schwachkopf online, which is a pretty harmless insult, kind of like moron. However, media reports then said that the raid was planned way before the Habeck insult over completely different, more severe allegations, but the suspect stated that the raid only had to do with this insult. In which case, the public pretty much agreed that raiding someone's apartment over the word Schwachkopf is completely blown out of proportion. The most reported online hate speech against a politician over the last few months was against Alice Weidel from the AfD though. Particularly the term Nazi-Schlampe, so Nazi slut, has been used a lot according to media reports. However, Weidel hasn't made a statement about whether or not she will press charges about this. Her party, the AfD, generally criticizes this section and wants to remove it. Now, that being said, what's always protected under freedom of expression is any type of criticism. Most importantly, criticism of the government, politicians, and other people in positions of power, as that's an essential part of a functioning democracy. Also, public debates, as well as political discussions, are generally situations where freedom of expression usually has priority over someone's personal honor, and the same goes for arts, such as comedy, satire, caricature, cabaret, advertisement, etc. In those cases, the threshold for what constitutes an insult is a lot higher than in other cases. So politicians get mocked all the time in Germany, whether it's on TV, in print, or right now during Carnival, which traditionally gets very political, on giant floats or in these satirical speeches. All of that is fully protected by freedom of expression in Germany. But getting back to the limits, we said that those are found in personal honor, which we just discussed, protection of the youth, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, you know, things like regulating violence and sexual content in media, and other general laws. One of those laws is the one about Volksverhetzung, which in English translates to incitement to hatred, or incitement of the masses, or incitement of popular hatred, or instigation of the people. There are many different translations. This is the full section in the German Criminal Code. Feel free to pause the video if you want to read the whole thing, but in short, Volksverhetzung is when someone incites hatred in a manner capable of disturbing the public peace against a national, religious, ethnic, or racial group, or against individuals based on their group identity. This includes violating human dignity by insulting, maliciously maligning, or defaming people for belonging to such a group, as well as calling for violent or arbitrary measures against people who belong to those groups. Since German history has shown how unchecked hate speech against minority groups can lead to real-life violence, and in the worst case, even genocide, this law is intended to regulate hate speech and prevent something like that from happening again. This is also the law that covers Holocaust denial, which is something I've mentioned several times here on my channel and which has always been a special point of discussion among my American viewers. In particular, it says that it's illegal to publicly deny or downplay the acts committed under National Socialism, aka during the Nazi regime. And since a recent change to the law in 2022, this now also goes for other war crimes and genocide. The idea behind this is that Germany as a country has a special responsibility towards the victims of the Holocaust and their descendants and needs to protect their honor. Additionally, the Bundesverfassungsgericht, so the highest court in Germany, has decided that false claims about historical events that have factually been proven don't fall under the protection of free expression, since denying historical facts can't be considered a personal opinion. Volksverhetzung is punished with a fine or up to 5 years in prison, depending on the severity and which of these categories it falls under. One of the most famous cases of Holocaust denial is that of Ursula Haverbeck, who in the last 20 years of her life was repeatedly convicted to fines and even prison sentences for publicly claiming that Auschwitz was not an extermination camp. Her last conviction happened last year in June, just a few months before she ended up passing away in November at the age of 96. During the Third Reich, her husband was involved in the national leadership of the Nazi Party, and after World War II, she herself was involved in alt-right groups up until her death. Related to that, what's also not covered by freedom of expression in Germany is the use of propaganda material and symbols of unconstitutional and terrorist organizations, except for when it's part of art, science, research, teaching, or historical footage. This includes the display of the swastika, for example, but also doing the Hitler salute in public. Other unconstitutional organizations this applies to, besides the Nazi Party, are the German far-left terror organization Red Army Faction from the 1970s, or nowadays organizations like ISIS or Hamas. That's why in the context of the Gaza war, the phrase "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" has actually been banned in some cases in Germany, partly based on this law as well as incitement to hatred. But courts have ruled differently about this in different cases due to the fact that in some instances the phrase was used as a harmless call for the liberation of Palestinians, while in other cases there was reason to believe that it was a call for genocide of the Israeli people. This law is also the reason that last year AfD politician Björn Höcke was fined twice for publicly using the Nazi slogan "Alles für Deutschland," which historically was used by Hitler's paramilitary organization Sturmabteilung, or for short SA. Other general laws that pose limits to freedom of expression in Germany include threat to commit criminal offenses and public incitement to crime. Now, I think many people who watched JD Vance's speech and the 60 Minutes episode were under the impression that somehow freedom of speech laws, or at least the way they're being enforced, had changed recently. So let's talk about what's new and what isn't. So all of the laws on freedom of expression in Germany that we talked about up until here have, at their core, been in place ever since the country was founded in 1949, and many of those go even further back in German history. The biggest novelty here, which was shown in the 60 Minutes episode, is that Germany has made an effort in the last few years to also enforce these laws online and ensure that the internet isn't treated as a lawless space. That's why in 2017, Germany passed the Network Enforcement Act, or colloquially also called the Facebook Act, with the goal to combat fake news, hate speech, and misinformation online. The act obliges any social media platform with over 2 million users to remove illegal content within 1 to 7 days after receiving a user complaint, depending on the severity. And the deleted content must be stored for at least 10 weeks for evidence purposes. In 2021, the law was expanded so that it now even requires the platforms to report serious cases directly to police, such as cases of child pornography, threats to commit violent crimes, as well as threats to the democratic state of Germany. Non-compliance can cost the social media platforms up to 50 million euros in fines. A few years ago, Facebook already had to pay 5 million euros in penalties. In 2022, the entire EU passed similar regulations in their Digital Services Act, by the way, which is what JD Vance was referring to in his speech. But to stay on the topic of Germany, the Facebook Act has in fact received a lot of criticism since it's been implemented, both within Germany and internationally. Those points of criticism include that it puts too much power and responsibility in the hands of private tech companies who are not properly trained on what's legal and illegal in Germany, and therefore might wrongfully delete posts that actually are protected by free expression. It was criticized emphasize that authoritarian countries like Russia, Turkey, and Venezuela have used the Facebook Act as a model for their own internet censorship laws, and that it doesn't even effectively reduce hate speech. Soon after the Facebook Act came into effect, the 16 German states started establishing task forces to combat online hate speech. One of those is shown in the 60 Minutes episode, the one in the state of Lower Saxony. And in 2022, a federal office called the Central Reporting Unit for Criminal Content on the Internet was set up, and authorities started to conduct raid days several times a year, searching the homes of individuals who are under suspicion for spreading online hate speech. Here are a couple examples of what that can look like. This past November, German authorities conducted a raid day where they visited over 50 homes nationwide, which may have been the day that the 60 Minutes episode was filmed. That raid specifically focused on anti-Semitic hate speech. Now, having limits on what's protected under free speech is common practice in every country. Even here in the US, which is often considered the country of free speech, there are limits to what you're allowed to say. Things that aren't protected include incitement to imminent lawless action, defamation, fraud, obscenity, child pornography, fighting words, and threats. That's the condensed version, obviously. Since this video isn't about free speech in the US, we're not gonna go too much into detail here, but unlike in Germany, hate speech is for the most part protected under the right to free speech here, and there are many Supreme Court cases that have emphasized this. However, I do also want to briefly mention that recently there has been a lot of criticism about the state of freedom of speech here in the US due to instances like the White House banning a reputable news agency because they didn't use the new American name Gulf of America, the president suing TV networks such as ABC and CBS, and an increase of book bans at public schools. Generally, I think it's important to point out that as humans, we tend to consider the circumstances we grow up with to be somewhat normal and reasonable. And one thing that throws a lot of us Europeans off about the US is that TV broadcasts and even music are censored here. Like every time someone says so much as shit on daytime television, it gets bleeped here, which to people who didn't grow up with that is baffling.
You must have eaten some in your time.
Before I moved here, I didn't even know that all of these American songs that are being played in their original version in Germany have so-called clean versions so that they can be played on the radio here. A, B, C, D, forget you. As an outsider, it seems kind of wild that the country of free speech straight up censors their media. But to most Americans, this seems completely normal and reasonable because they want to protect minors from being exposed to profane language. And vice versa, while most Germans consider it reasonable and even important to ban Nazi symbols and Holocaust denial, I know that many Americans find that to be an overreach. And I'm not trying to say that there's a right or a wrong perspective here. I'm just trying to point out that perspectives on what appears reasonable are certainly affected by what we're used to. Now, there are different indexes that rank freedom of expression and freedom of press in different countries all over the world, and when we look at where Germany is ranked on those, we can see that it gets a score of 0.95 on this 2023 index by VDEM, which puts it slightly above the US with 0.93 and on place 14 overall. This 2022 GSDI index on freedom of expression has Germany on rank 10 with a score of 0.83 and the US at 0.77. However, they also have an index here that shows how much a country's citizens value freedom of speech, and for that, the US clearly ranks above Germany with a score of 78 out of 100 over 66 in Germany. The 2024 Index on Freedom of Press by Reporters Without Borders also has Germany as 10th with a score of 83.84, while the US is on rank 55 with a score of 66.59. And this global freedom score, which ranks overall freedom in a country, gives Germany a score of 95 out of 100 and the US a score of 84. Overall, I think it's worth noting that when comparing Germany to the rest of Europe, laws on regulating hate speech are pretty common in other European countries too, including the UK, France, Italy, or the Netherlands, just to name a few. And aside from Germany, 17 European countries have laws that ban Holocaust denial. At the end of the day, I think it's safe to say that freedom of expression is a highly valued fundamental right in Germany that's protected by the Constitution. And according to various international indexes, this isn't something that just exists on paper, but is very much alive and well in everyday life too. However, there definitely has been a lot of criticism about the prosecution of hate speech recently, particularly in regards to the fairly new attempt to enforce German hate speech laws on the internet. And I'm sure it'll take some more back and forth until the German system has found a healthy balance here, and criticism, feedback, and public discourse are indispensable for that. Overall though, I think in an international context, it's important to keep in mind that different countries have different constitutions, different histories, and different legal frameworks. So when JD Vance says insulting someone is not a crime, that might be true for the US, but in Germany, insult actually is a crime in many cases and has been ever since this country was founded. Now, of course, you're allowed to be critical of those laws. Maybe you think they shouldn't exist in the first place or that they should be changed. That's totally valid, and that's everyone's right to express those views, both here in the US and in Germany. I mean, there are many laws here in the US that, to me as a German, seem pretty outlandish too. Like the fact that people can't legally drink alcohol until they're 21, or that it's illegal to drink in public. Many Germans would feel restricted in their freedom by that. But once you take a closer look at American history, you get a better understanding of where these laws come from. And I think the same goes for Germany in regards to these laws about freedom of expression, personal honor, and incitement to hatred. Also, to briefly address JD Vance's point that some political parties were excluded from the Munich Security Conference, I think it's important to know that this conference is not hosted by an official government entity, but rather by an independent nonprofit organization. And since both the AfD party as well as the BSW had previously walked out of the German parliament during a speech by Ukrainian President Zelensky, the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Christoph Heusgen, believed that inviting them wouldn't contribute to the foundational principle of the conference, which is peace through dialogue. Now, of course, we could ask, why is this conference hosted by an independent organization to begin with? And why can one person decide about this? But in this case, I guess it technically was part of this person's freedom of speech, or freedom of choice. If you want to hear what other people have to say about this topic, some of my fellow German-American YouTube colleagues, like Nalf, Haley Alexis, and James Bray, have made videos about this discussion on freedom of speech as well, so I'll link those in the video description for you if you're interested. And Nalf and I have also made a video about the general topic of freedom a couple years ago, and whether or not we feel more free in the US compared to Germany. Again, all of that will be linked down below. I hope this video doesn't get demonetized too, but if you want to support me and my channel, you can always do that with the super thanks button down below. You can buy me a coffee, send me a tip, join my Patreon community, or of course, simply support me with a thumbs up, a comment, or by subscribing to my channel. I hope I was able to provide some context to this whole conversation, and I would love to know what you guys think about all of this in the comments below, but please make sure to stay respectful and engage in a civil debate. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you next time. Tschüss!